Okay, so let's get started. And a warm welcome to everybody to this event. So Boxed, Exploring Containment and Resilience in Times of Crisis. So this event's co-organised by the Warwick Borders, Race, Ethnicity and Migration Cross-Faculty Research Network, BREM, as well as by WICID, the Warwick Interdisciplinary Centre for International Development. And just a sincere thanks to WICID for all the support today, and especially to Sue for helping us with the practical organisation of the event. So I want to highlight that we're recording this meeting. Please don't be put off by that. When we get to, when we get to the audience engagement, you are welcome to either put your questions in the chat or raise your hand and speak directly. I need to say something kind of formal at the beginning of this, just to get your agreement to be recorded. So here goes. WICID is hosting this event. We'll be recording it and posting it to our YouTube channel. We may also use clips, images, recordings, quotes, and other parts of the recording in WICID publications and share via social media. And during the Q&A, if you wish to remain anonymous, please just indicate so by typing anonymous before your question. Okay, so I'll take that as nobody's exited, so let's go with that as an agreement. Okay, so a warm welcome to everybody. I'm Vicki Squire, Professor in the Department of Politics and International Studies here at Warwick and co-convener of the Warwick BREM network. And I'm here today with Laura Nyahuye, I hope I pronounced correctly, Laura, and Heaven Crawley, otherwise known as the artist and the prof. So you may have already seen the online resource for the artistic collaboration between Heaven and Laura, which they will be speaking to today. And I really urge you to have a look if you haven't yet. It's really rich and engaging and a really wonderful piece of work. And the artist and the prof emerged from Laura and Heaven's ongoing engagement during the COVID-19 lockdown, which provided an opportunity for them to draw together their personal and professional experiences to reflect on issues of migration, resilience and hope in times of crisis. And before I introduce them, I just want to kind of introduce this event, so Boxed, Exploring Containment and Resilience in Times of Crisis, by reading just a section that I found on the website that I thought was important to set the scene here. So they say, perhaps one of the strongest themes to emerge from this collaboration is our individual and collective resistance to the social and political categories that box us in, that serve constantly to remind us of our place, how we should and shouldn't behave and be, as women, as mothers, as migrants, as people from different ethnic and linguistic backgrounds, as people from different professional backgrounds, and at seemingly every turn we're required to comply with the expectations of others. These different identities interact and intersect with one another in complex ways. What does it mean to be a Black woman, a white woman, a teenage mum, a female artist, a female professor? What expectations are placed upon us? Which of these do we take on and allow to shape who we are, and which do we push against and resist? I think this sets the scene for our discussion really, really nicely. And we decided that rather than start this meeting with a biography of the speakers, it would be more appropriate for us to get to know the artist and the prof through conversation about the collaboration itself. And so I wanted to invite Laura and Heaven to start this by each sharing a poem inspired by their discussions and engagement. So over to you. Thanks.
So boxed in. You want to put me in a box. Tell me what I am and what I am not. But I am me. I am strong, pushy. I am kind, weak. I'm vulnerable, needy. I'm white, Black. I'm passionate, a kid on a gap year. You see what you want to see. You see who you want me to be. but I am all of these things at the same time, at different times. I am me. And my box is big enough to hold me, not contain me, to protect me, not limit me. And if I need a bigger box, a different box, I will find one. You cannot box me in. I will not allow myself to be put in your box. I am me.
No, I will not apologize. Does it offend you? Don't clip my wings. Category this, category that, ethnicity, blackness, whiteness, colorless. Don't clip my wings. I have no desire to fit in. No apologies. Born to be free, born to be me, born to thrive, not strive. Don't clip my wings. Category A, category B, ability, disability. Hey, I was born to be free, born to be me, no desire to fit in. I am me. For this, I will not apologize.
Thank you so much. Wow. Powerful. Yeah, let's give a round of applause. Thank you thanks for that. Really powerful start. I think it'd be great if we could start off with kind of a bit of, kind of a story. Let's hear the story really, around how this collaboration came about and its development over time.
Can I start, Laura?
Yeah, you can start, Heaven.
And maybe start with those two pieces, because just for some context, these two pieces were written completely separately. We wrote them entirely separately, actually at different moments in time, because Laura wrote her piece before we even started the collaboration, and I wrote my piece shortly into it. And I really remember strongly, I was just, it was locked down, so unable to go anywhere or do anything. And I remember walking through a woodland close to my house and having these kind of feelings of this boxedness in my head. And being a bit stuck as to where our collaboration was going, because we're sort of working this out together. And writing this and then sending it to Laura, and her writing a letter back to me in which she told me about no apologies. And we just saw the similarities between how we were both seeing the world and our place in it. And so this issue of categories, both in our work, but also in our personal lived experience, and this kind of frustration that I guess both of us were feeling, at the way in which others were not just perceiving us but expecting us to behave in certain ways to comply with their perceptions of us. And it was really striking, I think, wasn't it, Laura, how those two pieces were so similar. And we wrote two other pieces separately as well that ended up being similar. Mine was called Cracked, Laura's was called Crushed but Not Defeated. They were both, again, very similar in their themes and similar in the kind of ways in which we articulated, I guess, even the words that we used to describe our feelings about those experiences. So that doesn't really tell you about the kind of genesis of the collaboration, which is a bit more sort of, technical, but the spirit of the collaboration was something that really made this an amazing piece of work, I think, for both of us, like not just in terms of the outputs, but in terms of the experience of being in it.
I totally agree, because I remember reading Boxed, and my heart like really jumped. I was like, oh my gosh, I can so relate to this. And going back to no apologies, picking on the words, as in like it felt like we were in conversation, reading Boxed and then going back to no apologies. And I think it just made, like what you're saying, Heaven, it made the collaboration even more stronger. And the way that we didn't really get into this collaboration with like, okay, we are going to do A, B, C, D. This is how we're going to, we freed ourselves up to be what we want to be whom we want to be, of which what was quite interesting was also the resistance of what we were told to do, and us actually resisting that. It was so exciting, because there was this well, bonding is a loose word, but there was this really deep connection whereby Heaven would share about, you know, your childhood, and then I would identify with that. And I'm thinking, I grew up in Zimbabwe, and where is this connection coming from? So, but at the same time, the connection spoke to what we separately believe anyway, that somehow, some way, we are connected as women. So that was just a joyful experience, really.
Yeah, it was kind of both, it was simultaneously joyful and painful in quite a few ways, because the topics which we were kind of grappling with, the sort of subject matter, was personally very difficult in places for both of us. But I think as a sort of process, as a collaboration in terms of working through stuff, and I think a lot of us during COVID worked through stuff somehow, that seems to be quite a resonant theme with quite a few people. I think it was for me really beneficial to do that with somebody. You know, and it wasn't a sort of therapeutic relationship. It was very different than that. It was much more of a kind of relationship of equals in some way, exploring something together, rather than, you know, the ways in which sometimes these issues that you're trying to grapple with are discussed. So yeah, it was a really kind of, yeah, bonding is the wrong word somehow, because it was a real partnership. We kind of really worked through some stuff together and ended up with beautiful kind of outputs, just as a sort of, not as a side product exactly, but, you know, it wasn't the main objective. As Laura said, it wasn't like we need to sit down and do X, Y, and Z, albeit that the funder really wanted us to. We actually just got on with doing what we wanted. And then at the end of it, we ended up with these things that we then thought would speak to other people too. But it wasn't sort of object or output driven. And I think that's a really important bit of learning for other work that I'm involved in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Sorry, there's a bit of echo on the line. Can everyone hear okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I was thinking about that because I saw that it was a funded project. Laura, you're an artist. You're the artist. You're the prof, Heaven. And yet, when you kind of go onto the website, you don't really, you can't work out who's who, right? So that's great. In terms of, you know, those engagements. And I was wondering if that's something, you know, I come from a research side, but having worked with artists as well, I've really kind of noticed that the kind of the understanding of outputs really transforms. That, as you say, Laura, it's this sort of ongoing, it's a kind of process and a transformative process that is kind of the value there, and outputs are secondary. I thought that was really powerful, and I wondered if maybe you could say a bit more about that, because I was struck as well by, you know, these similar themes that are coming out for you both as women, but, you know, in your multi-layered identities. So the commonalities, why, you know, why drawing out those commonalities? Why is that important? You know, what's the kind of transformative potential of that, I guess. So that's quite a specific question. And I
think Laura should take that one as the artist.
Yeah.
Because the process, I think, is, as you say, really important, not just the outputs.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to come back to that now, Laura. I also wanted to ask a more general question, because, you know, this is to kind of open out to others as well.
Hello, are we still on, or is it my internet gone?
No, you're here.
You're here. Yeah. So Laura, do you want to come back on that question? Do you want to come back on that question around the, you know, the kind of artist research engagement and the importance of commonality before I move on?
Yes. I think I'll say, like, from my point of view, like as an artist, there's this, my approach to working is more of, there's more that brings us together than, you know, those things that really separate us. However, we have systems that we are already, like, you know, as women, if we come to us being as women, we are born into roles that are ready-made for us. Whatever, part of the world we are in, some are quite intense, some are a bit more like, flexible. And then we talk about, just social issues in general. We talk about migration, we talk about, so there are things that are there, but who am I? Who is heaven? Who are you? So it's this, that is the I, and that is the hope when I'm approaching work, whatever that project is or whatever the conversation is. I am just yearning to see that connection that we have as humans first, before the labels. So being in this space with heaven, I remember I would say, I don't really identify with the language, around, being a professor or a researcher and all these, like, the theories, the writing. It's something that I don't really. So the joy of connecting with heaven was how simple the connection was. It was very, but it had depth, you see. So it had the depth that spoke to policies. It had the depth that can stand in parliament. It can stand to, in those spaces that needs specific language. So that was the joy that it brought, because when I'm working and talking about migration and talking about women's rights and, like, how do we bring young people into these platforms? I'm looking to change policies, but my language is not the political language. So having this space to talk about this, being myself, but actually tackling a specific issue was amazing.
And I think just on that point of language, I think that's a really important point, because as researchers, what we talk about is positionality, right? And that's always in this very abstract kind of like, oh, my positionality in relation to my research subject type way. We don't actually talk about what this means to us personally, the feelings that it triggers, the kind of emotive responses we have, why we've chosen to speak with and engage with particular people. Yes, we do at one level, we talk about our positionality, but we don't talk about our emotions, our feelings, our connections. These are kind of not languages that we're allowed as professors or researchers to use, because they're not sort of academic enough. And I mean, for me, the kind of the point that Laura's making about our connection was worked the other way for me, which was, here's a really liberating space where I can talk about why I'm doing this work, what it is about my experience of violence, my experience of being boxed in, my experience of being, I was a teenage mum. I was doing my A-levels, pregnant at 17. I was dismissed, routinely by everybody as being a nobody, because those things meant that I couldn't be something else. And so I have a very personal reason for wanting to do some of the work that I do that comes from my personal history of being very excluded and marginalized and judged, essentially. And so when I see others being judged, because of their skin color, because of their religion, because of this label of migrant, I take that really personally. And so, but I'm not allowed to say that in academic writing, because that would be, too emotional, too personal. But it's absolutely central to my identity as a researcher. It's totally what makes me do the research that I do. And working with Laura, I could legitimately talk about those things, because that's a space where those kinds of connections are valued, and those sort of personal motivations have a space and are heard, and are not dismissed as being, overly emotional or not academic enough. So I think maybe that's where it worked, Laura, because we both kind of were able to do things that we're often in our own worlds not allowed to sort of do.
And I remember, when we talked about even domestic abuse, and we also touched on the shoe story, like how did you're just thinking, like, how connected, how rare, or you know, I can't even articulate how amazing that was. Like to say, okay, in this moment, I was just, it wasn't planned, but it's having the Zoom meetings. We're talking the domestic abuse story came, which is something that I talk about like in the spaces with the women that I work with. But then to have you yourself as well, heaven, like as in connecting with this, and we're sitting there talking in such a visceral and deep way, painful but liberating.
It's maybe worth saying, Laura, and for everybody that is here, that before we did this collaboration, Laura and I had only ever met once. And we've only ever met once since. We've actually only met twice in our entire lives. We met, well, we came across each other at a rising event at Coventry Cathedral, and our paths crossed, and we subsequently met. And then we never met again until recently when I came to Coventry. We had dinner together. So the kind of, I guess, we'll maybe come on to this in terms of the learning. What was so profound about this experience was it was all done over Zoom, an email, and there was no physical human connection at all. And yet somehow through these mechanisms, through an openness, you can actually have really meaningful relationships and conversations that do take you to a different place and produce beautiful things, I think. So I think, yeah, that was a kind of, I always forget that I've only met Laura twice, but it could, because our relationship is very strong, but it is only twice that we've met in person, and I think that's quite remarkable.
Amazing. And I just want to let people know in the audience that, you know, this is an open conversation space. So if at any point you want to ask or chip in, say something, comment, contribute, put your hand up or put something in the chat. But I thought maybe you could say a bit more about the methods then that you, and the kind of practicalities of how you develop this engagement, maybe through the shoes example or something else. But, you know, I think kind of getting into the nitty gritty, how, because I'm quite struck by what you said, Laura, about how kind of easily you connected. And I'm wondering, of course, on the biggest scale, like, you know, how would this work with people we don't connect with so easily, etc.? What's the scope there? But also, you know, is there something in the methods, in your ways of engagement that sort of facilitated that as well? But yeah, just a kind of broad question about, like, what did you do? Like, you met each other in the cathedral, you did lots of stuff on Zoom, you shared different poems you'd written at different times, but I get the sense of a much more interactive process going on as well. So maybe some more on that.
It's actually quite hard to even remember because it was so organic. But essentially, we started off with some emails from what I remember. Periodically, we'd move on to WhatsApp just because it was quicker. And then we'd have a bit of a stuck moment where we weren't quite sure what we were going to say next. And then somebody would do something like send a poem or... And then we got into some practical stuff. So I started making masks. So I did a face mask and then used that. Started ripping up some of my articles about categories and making papier-mâché out of them. And Laura was doing some fabric and other work with materials because that's very much her area. And so there was kind of lots of different interactions, wasn't there, Laura? And sometimes there was, sometimes Laura would send something and I would end up cutting it up and weaving it together, and then we'd read to one another, or we'd create a poem where one of us would say something and the next person had to use the last word of that sentence as the first word of their sentence. So we would kind of do some really interactive things, but they were always quite spontaneous and made up off the hoof. And we were always quite surprised when they worked. Is that fair, Laura? We were quite surprised, right?
Yeah. I'll say like the speaking to that is quite, yeah, that is really true. And speaking to the methods, I think the main one that I would say was we allowed ourselves to be ourselves. That's, if you can call that a method, because it's like the time, because I remember, Heaven, when we got, because we decided to exchange emails, because there was a time that we just organically emailed each other and then we got stuck, and then it was like, okay, what do we do? So we then we had a conversation that was like, okay, this is what's happening. We are getting stuck. So what do we do? So we allowed ourselves to communicate via WhatsApp or to be flexible in how we communicated. So that freed up the creativity. It wasn't like set as to like.
Oops, we might have lost Laura again.
Yeah, frozen. Laura, are you there? No, she's not connecting.
Hopefully she'll come back. But yeah, just to sort of carry on that point really about the method. It seems strange to say being yourself as a method, but I suppose what tends to happen in research is we have this sort of idea about methods and ways of doing things, and they can be very containing. And I mean, we even had this in relation to, I think we had to fill in an ethics form, and the ethics was around us. So it was really difficult because we had to kind of give ourselves permission to give our stories, which was a bit odd. But part of what we then had to do was to say, what were our methods? And we were like, well, it kind of depends which ones are going to work more than others, really. And there wasn't a sort of set framework for doing that. So it was very much, you know, allowing Laura's back, but allowing the methodology, if you like, the kind of approach to drive what practically worked. And so the points where we got stuck, we often did something a little bit different, like we'd go away and just do something, like I started making the masks, or, you know, we would just do something that would trigger some other thoughts. Because also bear in mind that getting stuckness was partly to do with the fact that we were processing very complicated, painful, difficult things in a COVID lockdown, which had its own challenges, wasn't a lot of fun for many people. And whilst there was a lot of space with that, there was also, you know, kind of the challenges of that, just the complexities and the feeling lonely and all of those sorts of things. So I think we just sort of went with the flow, for want of a better word. And when things got stuck, we didn't kind of like try to fix them with a very simple methodological fix. We just accepted that maybe it was a stuck time, and maybe we'll go off and do something else and come back together again. And there was no kind of judgment about that. What was really wonderful about this collaboration is there was never any judgment. There wasn't a kind of moment of, oh, Laura doesn't want to work with me anymore because she's not sending me an email, or I feel really bad because I can't come up with a method. You know, we just sort of accepted it was what it was. And I think that was a bit of a liberation because of COVID, actually, if I'm honest, because we had the time and space to do that. And often we don't, because we're being like, here's the deadline and we've got to produce this output, whereas we didn't have those constraints. So Laura, you disappeared, but you were saying about our interactions, and I just picked up that thread. So I don't know if you wanted to add to it.
Oh no, I think you've added enough. That's all right.
Can I also ask about, I guess, COVID and your situations? So I'm wondering, you know, COVID, you've spoken about COVID as a sort of, the lockdown as a facilitator of this maybe sort of slower work that you wouldn't normally have space for. But the way you've been talking about it is just in those terms, and like the stuff that you're processing and working through together, you know, how much of that is kind of COVID specific or sort of enhanced by the COVID situations that you were sort of personally facing at the time? I asked this because bringing that horrible academic word, I get a sense of your positionality quite strongly coming through in the material, but the kind of concreteness of the situations, I think, is quite an interesting one as well, which I'd really like to hear more about.
Laura can start on that one.
I think I would say, like, what helped me was that one meeting that I had with, there was a connection, instant connection, when I had heaven sharing at the cathedral event. So that was, I think that was a step in the right direction, because I literally like just connected, and like going back to, you know, language, because I really understood what you shared that day. I think it's something that I've shared with you, Evan. Like when you were sharing about migration, I understood what, and you shared it with passion. So there was a connection already there that I felt like, oh my gosh, I see this, I understand this, and this is my area of work. So then when this opportunity to connect came through COVID, there was there was a base, there was a foundation that kind of like existed, even if it wasn't necessarily communicated between us. There was something to jumpstart from. So I think this is what appears on the website, because they're really strong core values that were nothing to do with the COVID, but it's more of, okay, this is what I believe in, this is how I think. And then comes the COVID, where we were, we had to stop. And I remember sharing with Evan that, oh yeah, I thought it was such a horrible time in the sense of illness and death. But at the same time, there was a part of me that was thinking, oh yeah, it would be good to stop. It's really to press pause. It's a good time to press pause. But how do you even press pause? So then the reflection was coming in. So we were in similar circumstances, but processing it in our own ways, I guess. So that also helped. That's where the press pause and then the stop writing comes in, whereby there's something to talk about. We talked about that. We explored that, that subject and how I was taking it, how difficult it was. Quite difficult for me to even, like, when lockdown started, because I was looking to, oh my gosh, I'm going to do a lot of my work. I'm going to do this is what I'm going to do. But that's not what happened. It was like I had a period, like weeks of being numb and not even knowing, what to do. So this now project was really like a good start to, like, oh my gosh, I can actually make this. We can actually be, so it's having someone to talk to. It's kind of like therapeutic, but at the same time, it wasn't a therapeutic project. So there was something quite beautiful in all of it. Yeah.
But I mean, I think COVID was very gendered, is very gendered anyway, right? I mean, everything's very gendered, but we know, certainly within academia, the gendered consequences of COVID. Huge productivity increases by men who are publishing articles and doing this and doing that, whereas women are caring for children and older people, and grappling with some of these other issues, or in situations of domestic violence where they're then trapped in households and can't actually physically get out. So, for us, I think the specificity of COVID was it, after years, and Laura and I, it turns out, although we didn't know it at the time, started, had children relatively young, very young in my case, and constantly chasing something, this sort of, desire to sort of prove yourself, be good enough, and all those things. Suddenly stopping and not having to do all those things that are being required of you gives you the space to be able to work out what it is exactly that you're trying to say and why you're trying to say it. So I think it is quite context specific. It is quite COVID specific. But I really hope that some of our experiences and some of our learning from the project could go beyond COVID, if that makes sense. Because I think the methodology, if we want to call it that, and we can call it that, is this getting away from the being very driven at the beginning of a project by a set of questions that need to be answered and a set of outputs that need to be produced, and rather kind of really genuinely, and particularly in our work with refugees and migrants of one group or another, if we're going to call them that, really listening to what people have to say, rather than wanting to impose our own ideas about what they want to say or fit it into our own set of assumptions for our next article or our next piece. Really listening and responding to what someone's saying, as opposed to kind of going down your own trajectory in parallel to the person you're talking to. So I think that part of the kind of how you really open up the space outside of COVID to be much more listening and a little less kind of having your own. And it's difficult because, you know, as researchers, we go into projects with a set of questions. That's what we've got the money to do. And it's hard not to stick by that, even if it doesn't fit what people are telling you. But I think there is a really important lesson to be learned about how meaningful the connection can be and how productive you can be if you don't necessarily just do that. I don't know if that answers your questions, Vicki.
Yeah, that's super interesting for me. You know, obviously also working in the field of migration and yeah, the listening. I think that point about listening is really crucial. But I don't want to make it about me because I feel like I've had the privilege of asking you lots of questions. So I do want to see if anybody else wants to ask, or just share a reflection, I guess. So Bryony, come on, yeah, go for it, Bryony.
Thanks. The kids are watching a film. I've been really enjoying listening, although I have there were brief moments when I wasn't able to. Apologies. But just maybe some thoughts in response to the last part of the conversation about listening and about the constraints of methodology. And something that I've always, I mean, I work a lot on human rights issues. And I've always really sought to try and bring the emotional aspect in because my research doesn't make sense to me without my emotional kind of landscape that I'm working within and my kind of real sense of purpose in the work. And I imagine that's the same for probably everyone on the call, certainly in migration work as well. And so just thinking, you know, in response to that kind of project of listening, of not being constrained, but at the same time, perhaps wanting to have a purpose to what we're doing and a message and a kind of an effect on the world. And I would just really love to hear from anyone else in the conversation, and Heaven and Laura, of course, particularly how you approach that or think about that in your work, either in this collaborative work you've done together or at other points in your career, in your life. And just for myself, you know, I'm always seeking to kind of find that balance, I suppose. So I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Laura?
I think, like, if I understood the question well, my approach is normally I come in as someone who is learning from, you know, from whoever it is, you know, be it like it's workshops, it's participants, whatever the space is, I'm bringing myself in a very vulnerable way. I'm vulnerable in that space because one, I'm bringing in my own experience, in the lived experience of as a migrant. However, also acknowledging that I don't know all migrant experiences, migrant stories. So it's leveling, even though like it's quite hard to level the ground, but it's like I try to level the ground, even if I am coming to give something, some sort of service or whatever it is, there's some sort of learning that's going to happen there. But I normally open the space with leveling myself to say, okay, here I am. I've come to serve. I do that by how I introduce myself or different objects that I bring to do with my work into that space. I would normally bring in people like in a way that they, for themselves, they actually come to the space of acknowledging and understanding the value that they are bringing into that space as well. So there's a way that it's like a little dance that we do before embarking on whatever it is that's going to happen after. So hopefully I've answered.
I imagine that everybody on this call, including yourself, Bryony, try from a research point of view to do that. But the problem is often that, in my experience in academia, and it may only be my experience, but you know, it's been a while now and it kind of seems to keep repeating itself, that many researchers don't go in with the view of leveling the field. That there's a kind of arrogance to academia, a kind of, I hold the knowledge and I have power that I can exert with that knowledge. And if you want to give me your knowledge in a way that I can, you know, bring that power to bear, then I will do something with it. So there's a kind of dynamic in the research process, which I don't think is typical of a lot of all research, but I have certainly seen it in migration research. I'm not disputing that for 1 minute. And I think, you know, that leveling is something that we could all sort of learn from in a way. Yes, we have certain kinds of knowledge and certain kinds of power, but other kinds of knowledge are also equally of value. And particularly in this space of trying to change the world, which I think a lot of us are in, those knowledges and those experiences can be even more valuable than the kind of academic translation of it, which is what Laura was talking about at the beginning, you know, the words that we need to put it in. Now, when you're talking about, for example, in a parliamentary context or in a policy context, I know from experience that the words that make a difference are not an academic sitting there telling you about the findings of their research, but normally somebody who's been brought in from the community, who have a lived experience of migration, who talks about how crap the system is and how it makes them feel and how it marginalizes them. Generally that knowledge, that experience will have more of an effect because it's not mediated by this very abstract academic language that sort of takes out the emotional from it, because migration is intuitively emotional. But people's reaction to migration, their negative attitudes towards migrants and their hostility is very, very emotive and very, very emotional. It's tapping into something else that's going on that has nothing to do with their knowledge about migration. We know that to be true. And so being very honest about that and having an emotional conversation rather than just a factual one, in my view, takes you to a different and better place, because you may not agree on the topic, and often we don't, but we then have this connection that Laura's describing, because we have some shared sense of what it is that we're trying to describe or talk about. And that connects us as human beings, even if we don't end up with exactly the same view of the world. So I think this leveling is exactly what we need to do, but I think academia kind of encourages the opposite, if I might say that. It actively encourages you to want to be abstract, detached, using language that people can't understand, so you seem big and clever. And this is what academia, you know, that's how you get your points in academia, but it's not actually what necessarily gets you good communication or good understanding or good connection.
Right, thanks. Don't know if you want to come back, Bryony. I guess I'm hearing, going back to your original question, you know, what's that sort of purpose? This sort of, the kind of, you know, what's the purpose? How do you marry that kind of having that purpose with research along with those sort of emotional aspects? What I'm hearing is that, in a sense, the listening itself is a purpose, isn't it? And part of that work in academia and other fields where we come together. Anyone else want to come in? Luz, Ezra, Jen?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing. I think the word that kept coming to my mind when you were both speaking was exhale. You know, it just feels so refreshing, the idea of the authenticity and the openness that comes with doing this kind of work. I always struggled with the idea, I think similar to what Bryony was saying, that the reason I came into international development to study it, to do research in it, was because it's important to me. You know, it's personal to me, it's real. And to somehow always need to disconnect how that passion for the subject from the work that I'm doing, or, you know, remove myself from it somehow. I always struggled with that, and the authenticity and the openness with which you've described the work that you've done, I just find so encouraging, because I think perhaps I'm lucky in this way with the people that I work with or have been working with, is making that connection in some ways does make a difference, not just in terms of the way the relationship works or the partnerships work, but the kind of output that come out of the kind of work that comes out of it, that perhaps a type of, maybe not innovative, I would say, but just the way that things flow from these kinds of working relationships, I think is some of the most beautiful and can be some of the really, really good work, right? Yeah, so I just want to say thank you for sharing that. I don't really have a question. I just find it all just such a positive thing to know about, that it does happen, and it's becoming more of a thing in academia.
Thank you, Muse. That's really lovely to hear. And one of the things, and this may not be the time for this, but Laura and I have grappled quite hard, probably not long enough, but we have grappled over how to take this work out to a bigger group, and how to, you know, maybe create some sort of I don't know what it would be, but some sort of something that goes beyond the two of us, that kind of takes the learning from the project and brings in a group of people who want to work in similar ways, who want to think about how we can extend that out into other audiences, you know, how we can, yeah, I mean, I don't know whether this is the place for it, but anybody who wants to kind of think about how we might do that would be very welcome to join us in another conversation another time. Because I think, Laura, we do feel there's something to be done, we just don't know what it is yet.
There's something to really give, because going back to, you know, to the layers of walls that we are born into, like we are women, there's a brick wall there, and then comes the system, and then comes, like, you know, what we're talking about, academia, how they want things to be done, removing emotions from how we are doing things. So so there's a lot of work, and that work is the one that is now talked about in a very negative way, where it's like, you know, you are a disruptor. That can come across very negative. You are resisting something in order for something really genuine to be given birth to, right? You want something birthed. So in order for that to happen, it needs more of us. It needs really more of us. There was a lot of resistance that we cannot even like really articulate well here, in it, even to do with this small project, in terms of, like, you know, what they were expecting. But we together, we managed to resist something in order to produce a piece of work that we are really happy about. So there's something here that would be really wonderful to carry forward to other women.
Yeah.
I had a question about not methods or the the sort of the forms of your expression and creativity. And I was wondering whether you were able to, because you're talking about boxed in, also whether you were able to move out of the normal ways in which you express yourself or express your creativity through the project. And especially, you know, when I saw that you were also, you know, writing poems, and you mentioned that you were emailing, and I think I would find it very difficult, because, you know, this is so much of what we do also in our sort of in the academic box of our lives, to sort of be so sort of word driven and written word driven. And I wondered whether it sort of pushed you to maybe like explore other forms of expression. And Laura as well, whether you I was just curious whether you experimented with new ways of communicating or expression and new forms of art. So yeah.
I've really enjoyed I call it prose rather than poetry. Poetry feels very kind of, I have this sort of idea of pretension associated with poetry. So I call it prose. I've really enjoyed the prose. I find it really, really liberating to be able to write in, you know, a few words what you would normally take a whole article to write. So I really enjoy that part. But I have to say I got stuck again when it came to some of the artistic, because I mean I have a sort of vague artistic background in the sense that I did A-level art, but, you know, so I can kind of draw, I can kind of bring myself to do creative things. I do stained glass and other things, and I cook a lot. But there was one piece that Laura and I were working on, and it was the mask piece, and I just couldn't I couldn't get the technique to work, and it just looked rubbish. So I found myself being very self-critical about the artistic outputs, because I was frustrated that I didn't have the skills that Laura had to be able to craft that, you know what I mean? And I imagine it works the same in academia, that people get frustrated they can't write in a way that academics can relate to. But, you know, from my perspective, it was just bad art at that point, even if it was trying to say something. So I guess I find the prose easier because words are something I work in anyway. Whereas Laura's producing these beautiful, you know, amazing creative fabric pieces and wonderful photographs, whereas I'm a bit more wordy, but yeah, for me, the prose, I really enjoyed the prose. And I've got one more to read before the end at some point, but yeah, I don't know, Laura, what you feel, because you have amazing, just your work is just beautiful.
I really, but you produced like really great work, because remember the woven, the one that actually went out, the woven words.
But I'm still just cutting up words.
That's me.
I creatively put the words back together in a different order, but it was still words.
Yeah, I thought that was beautiful. And I'll say like what the breakthrough for me was to actually model my work, because normally I wouldn't. I never used to like really model my work and really interact in that way. I would make and then look for someone else to be photographed, but because of COVID and lockdown, I did it, and that was it for me. I think if I find someone else to model my work, there will be a really strong reason why, because now
you model your work.
I just want to do it myself, because I felt so it was very explorative. And also the photographer himself, who is now passed on, unfortunately, the photographer was really patient and very accommodating. So we exploded in quite a, yeah, it was such a joy. It was such a joy to do that. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. I know that Sue and Jen haven't had a chance to come in, and more than welcome to. I just guess I had I was really struck by this word keeps coming up, stuck. And of course, I'm also thinking about that, you know, in migration research, you know, the experiences of people that I engage with who are stuck for years and years and years and years on end. And, you know, the kind of post-research work that, yeah, it's probably not a surprise we're all women here, is it? But that sort of, you know, that post-research work of sort of engagement with people I've met through my research and sort of supporting, finding ways to deal with that stuckness, and the way that, yeah, you've kind of kicked off lots of inspiration for me in that. So I really wanted to thank you both. We are going to end with a couple more poems, but just to give anyone else the chance to say anything now if they want to before we end with that. No, we love your praise, so over to you guys.
I was just going to say that one of the really strong themes that came out of our research, of our collaboration, which doesn't come necessarily so much through this conversation, was about resilience, because ultimately, and you'll see it on the website, you know, there's these kind of boxed and cracked and all these quite negative experiences that we're making sense of, but there's also a sense of resilience, and that's a really strong theme. So I don't know if, Laura, you've got a piece on resilience, but I'll read mine anyway, and we'll see if, I'm sure Laura has one to hand that's not dissimilar, because they often are. This one's called Bend Like the Trees. There's actually a photo of a tree bending, like it's a poplar, I think, that was bending that I saw, and it felt really, there was 3 trees together, one was really bent and the other ones were very upright, and it inspired this piece. So, bend like the trees. When the storm approaches, bend like the trees. You are strong, resilient, flexible, and you will survive. You will be different, a little bent out of shape, but beautiful in a different way. When the storm arrives, lean into the loneliness, the unknown spaces, the fear. For if you resist and try to fight it, you will crack, splinter, and fall. Bend like the trees when the storm arrives, for there are other trees around you, and they will shelter you, protect you, and keep you safe. The storm will pass, as it always does. The sun will shine, as it always does. and you will be left standing.
Well, thank you. I will read, yeah, which one? In my garden, there are sticks and stones, rainbows and parachutes, pine trees and pine cones. In my garden, there are rocks and pebbles, snails and rattlesnakes, snow and thunder. In my garden, there are cows and donkeys, mice and ants, rose bushes and jelly tarts. In my garden, there are friends and villains, raspberry trees, empty Coca-Cola cans. In my garden, there is sunshine and Milky Ways. My garden, a rumbling volcano waiting to erupt.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you, artists. Thank you, Prof. This has been such a great session, and thanks to everybody. Yeah, thanks to everybody for participating. I think we'd really love to continue these discussions. So yeah, let's definitely participate in that follow-up that you suggested, Evan. Thank you.
It's great if we could. This is the first time that Laura and I have talked about our work to anybody other than putting it out on the website. So we're really, you know, if people would like to work with us, just be in touch. I'm happy to, I'm sure Laura is too, share our details, and maybe we can start something anew together.
Yes, yes.
Sounds great.
Yes.
I think it resonates widely. So yeah, thank you, everybody. And
take care. Lovely to see you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.